Tonight we'll explore 5 haunting tales: the White Lady of the Wheat Fields, the Lamenting Dragon on the Mountain, the ritual that trapped a soul between worlds, the Geisha who became living shadow, and the skull that burns with eternal rage. Subscribe to the channel and let's begin. In the rural outskirts of Kyoto in 1868, farmers whispered of Shirayuki, a ghostly figure in white who wandered the wheat fields during foggy nights. Once a celebrated geisha named Yukiko who fell from grace and died while laboring in these same fields. Her spirit remained bound to the earth that witnessed her final moments of despair. You arrive in the farming village of Inazawa as autumn mist begins rolling across the golden wheat that stretches toward distant mountains. The locals speak in hushed tones about recent sightings of the White Lady, describing how her ethereal form glides between the grain stalks without disturbing a single stalk, her mournful wails echoing across the fields like wind through broken bells. Children dare each other to venture near the old well at dusk, but none have the courage to approach the crumbling stone circle where Yukiko met her end. The tragedy that created this restless spirit began in 1828, when Yukiko served as a highly sought geisha in Kyoto's prestigious Gion district. Her beauty and artistic skill earned her the patronage of wealthy merchants and minor nobility, but a scandalous affair with a married samurai destroyed her reputation overnight. Cast out from the flower houses with nothing but shame and debt, she fled to the countryside where distant relatives reluctantly allowed her to work their fields in exchange for shelter and meager sustenance. Yukiko's death came during the harvest season, when exhaustion and despair had worn her spirit to its breaking point. While carrying water from the ancient well that served the farm, she stumbled on the uneven stone rim and fell into its depths. Her body was recovered 3 days later, but villagers reported strange phenomena immediately after her burial: white figures moving through the grain fields at night, wells that suddenly ran dry, and crops that withered without explanation in perfect circular patterns. You examine the well where Yukiko died, finding it sealed with heavy stones and surrounded by protective talismans that show signs of regular renewal. The structure dates back centuries, built by farmers who understood that certain locations serve as natural gateways between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. Local elders explain that wells, caves, and other openings in the earth often become anchors for spirits who die in emotional turmoil, their consciousness clinging to the physical world through connections forged in their final moments. The manifestations of Yukiko's spirit follow predictable patterns that have been documented by villagers for 4 decades. On nights when fog rolls in from the mountains, her white-clad figure appears among the wheat stalks, always moving toward the sealed well, with movements that blend human grace with otherworldly fluidity. Her face, glimpsed briefly through the mist, shows the classical beauty that once made her famous, but her eyes hold depths of sorrow that no living person could survive experiencing. Village priest Jogan has dealt with Yukiko's haunting for over 2 decades, performing regular rituals designed to ease her spiritual suffering without attempting the forced banishment that could anger her ghost into more violent manifestations. His approach recognizes that some spirits remain earthbound, not from malevolence, but from unresolved grief that prevents them from accepting death and moving on to whatever existence awaits beyond the physical realm. You witness one of Yukiko's manifestations during a particularly thick fog that reduces visibility to mere arm's length. Her figure materializes gradually from the mist, her white kimono undulating in breezes that affect nothing else in the still night air. She moves through the wheat fields with purposeful determination, retracing the path she walked on the night of her death, her ghostly hands reaching toward the sealed well, as if trying to reclaim something that fell beyond her grasp. The emotional resonance of Yukiko's appearances affects everyone who encounters her spirit, creating waves of profound sadness that seem to emanate from her ghostly form like ripples on a pond. Farmers report being overcome with inexplicable grief when working near the well, while children experience nightmares filled with images of falling into dark water that reflects no light. Even animals avoid the area, their instincts warning them away from spiritual disturbances that their senses can detect but not understand. Priest Jogen's most ambitious attempt at resolving Yukiko's spiritual imprisonment comes during the autumn equinox, when the balance between light and darkness creates optimal conditions for communication between the living and the dead. His purification ritual involves not exorcism but invitation, calling upon Yukiko's spirit to manifest fully so that he can address the unresolved grief that keeps her bound to the earthly realm. The ceremony begins at sunset with the lighting of incense that creates smoke patterns designed to attract spiritual attention without threatening supernatural entities. Jogen's chanted prayers speak not of banishment but of understanding, acknowledging Yukiko's suffering while offering assistance in finding peace. The very air around the sealed well begins to thicken with supernatural presence as her ghost responds to this compassionate approach. Yukiko manifests with unprecedented clarity during the ritual, her form becoming solid enough to cast shadows in the flickering candlelight. For the first time in 40 years, she speaks, her voice carrying the refined pronunciation that marked her as an educated geisha, despite the anguish that now defines her existence. She describes the shame that drove her from Kyoto, the despair that consumed her final months, and the sudden terror that filled her last moments as she fell into the well's dark depths. The priest's patient listening allows Yukiko to express emotions that have festered within her spirit for decades, giving voice to feelings that she was never permitted to reveal during her mortal life. Her story emerges as a testament to the rigid social structures that destroyed women who transgressed unforgiving moral boundaries, leaving them with no path to redemption or second chances. The well became not just her grave but a symbol of the depths to which society condemned those who failed to maintain perfect virtue. As Yukiko's spiritual confession reaches its climax, Priest Jogen performs the ritual that will determine whether her ghost can finally find peace. Instead of forcing her spirit away from the earthly realm, he creates conditions that allow her to choose her own path forward. The ceremony involves planting a white cherry tree beside the sealed well, its roots reaching deep into the earth where her mortal remains rest while its branches stretch toward the heavens that await her soul. The transformation that follows defies conventional understanding of death and spiritual existence. Yukiko's ghostly form begins to merge with the newly planted tree, her consciousness finding anchor in living wood rather than the cold stone of the well that had trapped her for so long. Her white kimono becomes the tree's blossoms, her flowing hair transforms into its drooping branches, and her tears nourish its roots with spiritual essence that transcends ordinary plant biology. The ritual appears successful as Yukiko's nocturnal wanderings cease and the oppressive atmosphere that has haunted the wheat fields finally dissipates. The cherry tree grows with supernatural speed, reaching full maturity within weeks of its planting and producing blossoms of extraordinary beauty that attract visitors from neighboring villages. Farmers report improved crop yields in the areas surrounding the tree, as if Yukiko's spirit has transformed from a source of sorrow into a guardian presence that protects the land she once worked. But the resolution proves temporary rather than permanent. During the first full moon after the ritual, the cherry tree's blossoms release a fragrance so intensely sweet that it becomes almost narcotic, causing anyone who breathes it to experience visions of Yukiko's tragic life and death. More disturbing still, her ghostly figure begins appearing again among the wheat stalks, though now she seems connected to the tree rather than trapped by the well. Her manifestations timed to coincide with the tree's supernatural flowering cycles. The ancestral curse that prevents Yukiko's complete spiritual liberation gradually reveals itself through careful observation of the tree's behavior and the ongoing manifestations of her ghost. The cherry tree serves not as her final resting place, but as a more beautiful prison, its supernatural beauty masking the same spiritual bonds that once anchored her consciousness to the sealed well. Her transformation has changed the form of her imprisonment without breaking the fundamental curse that keeps her bound to the earthly realm. You discover through research into local history that the curse originates not from Yukiko's personal tragedy, but from older spiritual debts accumulated by the land itself. The wheat fields were built on the site of an ancient battlefield where thousands died without proper burial rites, their unresolved deaths creating a spiritual vortex that attracts and traps souls who die in emotional turmoil. Yukiko's ghost represents not an isolated haunting, but the most visible manifestation of a larger supernatural problem that affects the entire region. The tree becomes a focal point for supernatural activity that extends beyond Yukiko's individual spirit, attracting other restless souls who find temporary refuge in its supernatural embrace. During its monthly flowering cycles, villagers report seeing multiple ghostly figures gathered beneath its branches, fallen warriors, plague victims, and other tragic dead who seek the comfort that the transformed Geisha's spirit provides. The cherry tree has become a supernatural sanctuary where the earthbound dead can experience moments of peace while remaining trapped in their eternal limbo. Priest Jogan's attempts to break the deeper curse that affects the entire region meet with limited success, as the spiritual contamination involves forces that predate organized religion in Japan. The battlefield's accumulated suffering has created a permanent weakness in the boundary between life and death, making the area a magnet for supernatural phenomena that no single ritual can resolve. The priest begins planning a series of ceremonies designed to gradually cleanse the land over multiple generations rather than attempting immediate but temporary solutions. The cherry tree's transformation into a sacred site brings both blessing and burden to the farming community. Pilgrims arrive seeking spiritual healing and artistic inspiration, bringing economic benefits to the village while also creating practical challenges for farmers who must balance agricultural work with their new role as guardians of a supernatural shrine. The tree requires constant maintenance to prevent its supernatural properties from overwhelming the surrounding landscape with spiritual energy. Your observations during the tree's flowering cycles reveal the complex relationship between Yukiko's transformed spirit and the living world she continues to inhabit. Her ghostly manifestations show increased intelligence and emotional sophistication compared to her earlier wanderings, suggesting that her consciousness has evolved through its merger with the tree's life force. She appears to be developing into something more than human ghost, but less than fully transcendent spirit, trapped in a state of supernatural limbo that offers neither complete mortality nor ultimate enlightenment. The seasonal changes that affect the tree create corresponding fluctuations in supernatural activity throughout the region, with Yukiko's spiritual presence waxing and waning according to natural cycles that govern plant growth and dormancy. Spring brings the most intense manifestations as the tree's sap rises and its blossoms prepare to unfold. while winter's dormancy corresponds to periods of relative spiritual quiet when her ghost rarely appears among the wheat fields. Local farmers adapt their agricultural practices to accommodate the supernatural influences that emanate from the sacred tree, learning to time their planting and harvesting to avoid the most intense periods of spiritual activity. Some discover that crops grown near the tree possess unusual properties, enhanced flavor, improved nutritional content, and resistance to diseases that affect plants grown in ordinary soil. These benefits come with risks, as consuming too much of the supernaturally influenced grain can cause vivid dreams and temporary sensitivity to spiritual phenomena. The tree's annual flowering becomes a community event that attracts visitors from across the region, transforming the farming village into a pilgrimage destination where people come seeking blessings, healing, and contact with the supernatural realm. Yukiko's transformed spirit appears to respond positively to this attention, her ghostly manifestations becoming more frequent and interactive during periods when many visitors gather beneath the tree's supernatural canopy. Your final observation comes during the anniversary of Yukiko's death, when the tree's flowering reaches its peak intensity and her spiritual presence becomes strong enough to allow direct communication with the living. Her ghost speaks of the loneliness that defines her existence between worlds, trapped in eternal anticipation of a liberation that may never come. She has accepted her fate as guardian of the cherry tree and protector of the wheat fields, finding purpose in her supernatural exile while continuing to hope for eventual release. The tree stands as both monument and mystery, its supernatural beauty hiding the tragedy of a spirit who sought redemption but found only a more elaborate form of imprisonment. Yukiko's consciousness has become inseparable from the tree's life force, her individual identity preserved through merger with plant consciousness that offers immortality at the cost of ultimate spiritual evolution. Her story serves as a reminder that some forms of salvation create new problems while solving old ones. The farming community settles into its new reality as custodians of a supernatural shrine that brings both blessings and responsibilities they never sought. The cherry tree requires constant attention from both agricultural and spiritual perspectives, its care demanding knowledge that bridges practical farming with esoteric religious practices. Future generations will inherit the duty of maintaining this balance, while hoping that time and patience might eventually provide Yukiko's spirit with the peace that has eluded her for so long. In the end, the White Lady of the Wheat Fields achieves a form of peace through transformation rather than transcendence, her consciousness finding new purpose as guardian of the land that witnessed both her tragedy and her spiritual evolution. The sacred cherry tree serves as proof that some spirits can adapt to their supernatural circumstances while maintaining their essential humanity, creating beauty from suffering while remaining eternally bound to the earthly realm that shaped their mortal existence. In the remote province of Ki in 1852, mountain climbers spoke in terrified whispers of Ryujin-san, the dragon lady who haunted the peak of Mount Ikoma after a rival's jealous curse transformed the once beautiful Geisha Misaki into a monstrous creature with black scales and eyes that burned like twin suns, her anguished wails echoing across the valleys below as she mourned the beauty that had been stolen from her forever. No traveler dared venture beyond the tree line after sunset, when her fiery breath could be seen illuminating the mountain's summit like a beacon of eternal torment. You arrive in the village of Yamakage as winter storms begin lashing the mountainside, drawn by reports of supernatural phenomena that have plagued the region for over a decade. The locals huddle in their homes after dark, boarding windows against winds that carry more than snow. They bring the acidic scent of dragon's breath and the sound of claws scraping against stone as the cursed creature paces her prison of peaks and crags, forever denied the release of death or the possibility of redemption. The tragedy that created this mountain demon began in Osaka's pleasure quarters, where Misaki's extraordinary beauty and artistic talents made her the most sought-after geisha in the city. Her rival Tomoko, consumed by jealousy over losing wealthy patrons to Misaki's superior charms, sought out a practitioner of forbidden magic who promised revenge through transformation. The curse required Misaki's blood mixed with dragon scales stolen from an ancient shrine, creating a potion that would strip away her human form and replace it with something that matched the ugliness of Tomoko's envious heart. The transformation occurred during Misaki's final performance at the prestigious Hanazakura tea house, when she collapsed mid-dance as her bones began elongating and her skin erupted in black scales that spread across her body like plague. Her screams of agony shattered every mirror in the building as her face stretched into a reptilian snout filled with fangs that glowed white-hot with supernatural fire. The terrified audience fled as she crashed through the wooden walls, her newly massive form no longer able to fit within human structures. Driven by pain and horror at her transformation, Misaki fled to Mount Ikoma, where she hoped isolation would allow her to die in peace. But the curse that changed her body also granted her immortality, trapping her consciousness within a monstrous form that grew more powerful and terrible with each passing year. Her attempts to end her existence through fire, falls, and starvation all failed, as the magic that transformed her made her virtually indestructible while preserving every fragment of her human memories and emotions. You witness one of her manifestations during a fierce mountain storm, when her massive silhouette appears through the driving snow like a nightmare-given form. Her scales reflect lightning with an oily sheen, while her eyes burn with flames that never consume their fuel, casting shadows that dance independently of her movements. Most terrifying of all are her laments, songs that combine the refined vocal techniques she mastered as a geisha with the raw power of draconic vocal cords, creating melodies of such profound sorrow that listeners are driven to tears despite their terror. The cursed geisha's supernatural abilities extend far beyond her physical transformation, encompassing control over weather patterns that she uses to express her emotional states. When rage consumes her, hurricane winds scour the mountainside while her fiery breath melts snow into torrential floods. During periods of deepest despair, she summons freezing mists that coat the peaks in ice, while her mournful cries trigger avalanches that block mountain passes for weeks at a time. Local wildlife has adapted to the dragon's presence in ways that reveal the extent of her supernatural influence over the mountain ecosystem. Birds avoid nesting above the tree line during her active periods, while larger predators flee to lower elevations when her hunting instincts drive her to patrol territorial boundaries. Most unnervingly, some animals show signs of partial transformation: wolves with patches of scales, eagles whose eyes glow with unnatural fire, and bears whose roars carry harmonics that suggest exposure to draconic vocal frequencies. Buddhist monk Daisen arrives in Yamakage summoned by desperate pleas from villagers who can no longer endure the supernatural torment that emanates from the mountain peaks. His reputation for resolving difficult spiritual cases precedes him, but even he admits uncertainty about confronting a creature whose transformation resulted from magic that predates organized religious traditions. His approach involves not exorcism but therapy, recognizing that beneath the monster's form lies a human consciousness suffering from spiritual wounds that conventional rituals cannot heal. The monk's initial attempts to communicate with the dragon involve ascending the mountain during daylight hours, when her manifestations are typically less violent. His presence triggers immediate response from the cursed creature, who emerges from her cave lair with movements that blend reptilian power with the graceful gestures that once defined her artistic performances. Her initial reaction shows pure rage at human intrusion, but Monk Daisen's calm demeanor and respectful approach gradually convince her that he represents understanding rather than threat. Through patient dialogue conducted across several dangerous encounters, Daisen learns the full extent of Misaki's psychological torment. Her dragon form possesses enhanced senses that make her acutely aware of her own monstrosity, while her immortality ensures that she cannot escape through death the horror of what she has become. Most cruelly, she retains perfect memory of her former beauty and artistic achievements, making every moment of her transformed existence a comparison between past glory and present degradation. The breakthrough in their communication comes when Monk Daisen presents the sacred mirror that will serve as the centerpiece of his therapeutic intervention. The polished bronze surface, blessed by generations of temple priests, possesses the ability to reflect not just physical appearance, but spiritual essence, showing observers the truth of their inner nature rather than their external form. For a creature whose greatest torment involves the disconnect between her human consciousness and monstrous body, such a mirror represents both ultimate terror and potential salvation. Misaki's first glimpse of her reflection in the sacred mirror triggers a reaction of such intensity that the mountain itself seems to respond to her emotional upheaval. Avalanches cascade down multiple slopes, while supernatural fires ignite in patterns that suggest her consciousness is literally burning away layers of self-deception and denial. But within the mirror's depths, she sees not the dragon she has become, but the geisha she remains in spirit, beautiful, artistic, and fundamentally human despite the curse that has warped her physical form. The confrontation with her true reflection forces Misaki to acknowledge the duality of her existence, monster in body but woman in soul, powerful beyond human comprehension yet powerless to reclaim the life that jealousy destroyed. Monk Daisen guides her through this recognition, helping her understand that acceptance of her transformed state represents not defeat, but the first step toward finding peace within circumstances that cannot be changed through force of will alone. The climactic moment arrives when Misaki finally embraces both aspects of her nature simultaneously, no longer fighting against the dragon she has become while refusing to abandon the geisha she was born to be. This act of spiritual integration creates visible changes in her monstrous form, with her scales beginning to shimmer with iridescent colors that suggest beauty hidden within apparent ugliness. Her fire breath becomes less destructive and more illuminating, casting light that reveals rather than consumes. As her psychological healing progresses, Misaki's physical form begins to dissolve, not through destruction, but through transcendence. Her dragon body transforms into patterns of light that dance through the mountain air like aurora given form, while her consciousness finally finds the release that decades of torment have denied her. The sacred mirror reflects this transformation, showing her spirit ascending beyond the physical realm, while her human essence merges with the eternal aspects of natural beauty she spent her mortal life celebrating. The mountain falls silent for the first time in over a decade as Misaki's spirit completes its journey beyond the boundaries of physical existence. The supernatural storms that have plagued the region dissipate, while the acidic scents and scorched earth that marked her presence begin healing through natural processes, accelerated by the spiritual energy released during her transcendence. Villagers emerge from their homes to find clear skies and calm winds that suggest the return of normal weather patterns. But the resolution proves incomplete rather than final, as subtle signs indicate that aspects of Misaki's consciousness remain connected to the mountain even after her apparent liberation. During certain atmospheric conditions, climbers report hearing distant songs that blend human vocals with otherworldly harmonies, while the sacred mirror occasionally reflects images of a beautiful woman dancing among clouds that crown the mountain's peak. Her presence has become less terrifying but no less real, transformed from tormented monster into something approaching benevolent guardian spirit. The mirror that facilitated Misaki's transformation remains on the mountain as both tool and monument, its reflective surface continuing to show observers truths about themselves that ordinary mirrors cannot reveal. Monk Daisen establishes a small shrine around it, creating a pilgrimage site where individuals struggling with their own transformations, physical, emotional, or spiritual, can seek the same kind of healing that freed the Dragon Lady from her curse of jealous transformation. Your descent from the mountain carries with it the understanding that some curses can be broken not through force but through acceptance, and that true beauty exists independent of physical form. Misaki's story demonstrates that even the most terrible transformations cannot destroy the essential self if consciousness retains the courage to embrace both its fallen and transcendent aspects. Her journey from human to monster to spirit represents not tragedy but evolution, painful growth that ultimately leads to wisdom impossible to achieve through easier paths. The village of Yamakage slowly adapts to its new reality as custodian of a sacred site where transformation and redemption intersect. The mountain draws visitors seeking their own forms of healing, while locals develop new traditions around honoring the spirit who transformed their peak from a place of terror into a destination for pilgrims seeking understanding of their own hidden natures. The economic benefits of spiritual tourism help compensate for the years of isolation imposed by supernatural fear. Seasonal changes now bring different manifestations of Misaki's transformed presence, with spring bringing gentle songs that encourage plant growth, while autumn carries melodies that help prepare local wildlife for winter hibernation. Her influence has become integrated into the natural cycles that govern mountain ecology, suggesting that her consciousness has found ways to contribute positively to the world that once rejected her monstrous form. The sacred mirror develops its own reputation as visitors discover its ability to reveal hidden aspects of personal identity that conventional self-reflection cannot access. Some see their own potential for transformation, while others gain insight into psychological wounds that have shaped their life choices. A few report glimpsing Misaki's spirit within the mirror's depths, her presence offering comfort to those struggling with their own experiences of rejection and transformation. Your final observation reveals that the mountain has become a place where the boundaries between beauty and ugliness, human and inhuman, sacred and profane, lose their conventional meanings. Misaki's transformation from cursed dragon to transcendent spirit demonstrates that even the most devastating magical attacks can become opportunities for spiritual growth if approached with sufficient courage and wisdom. Her laments, still occasionally heard on quiet nights, no longer speak of despair but of the complex beauty that emerges when consciousness learns to embrace all aspects of existence. The legacy of the lamenting spirit serves as a reminder that jealousy's curses often teach their victims truths that normal existence could never provide, and that apparent monstrosity can hide forms of beauty that transcend physical appearance. Misaki's journey from geisha to dragon to guardian spirit illustrates the possibility of finding meaning and purpose, even within circumstances that seem designed to destroy human dignity and hope. In the end, Mount Ikoma stands transformed from a place of terror into a sanctuary where transformation itself is honored as a fundamental aspect of existence. The mountain's new identity as a pilgrimage destination ensures that Misaki's story will continue inspiring others who face their own battles with curses, jealousy, and the challenge of maintaining human dignity within circumstances that threaten to strip away everything that defines personal identity. In the mountains of Nara in 1863, the ruins of Seiryu-ji Temple house the tormented spirit of Rangiku, a geisha who attempted a forbidden immortality ritual that twisted her soul into a nightmarish fusion of human beauty and demonic horror, her dual nature trapping her between worlds as she searched endlessly for someone brave enough to complete the ancient ceremony that would either restore her humanity or grant her the mercy of final destruction. Her agonized cries echoed through the temple halls at dusk, when her transformed appearance became visible to mortal eyes, half ethereal beauty, half-horned monster with claws that scraped stone floors as she dragged herself through corridors seeking redemption or release. You approach the abandoned temple as autumn mist clings to its crumbling foundations. Guided by reports from mountain pilgrims who describe encounters with a creature that begs for help in the refined voice of a cultured woman, while displaying physical features that belong in the deepest levels of Buddhist hell. The temple's wooden structures sag under decades of neglect, but protective talismans still hang from the eaves, placed by monks who understood that some spiritual contamination requires constant vigilance to contain. Rangiku's transformation began in 1848, when her beauty started fading despite her relatively young age, threatening the career that provided her only means of survival in Kyoto's competitive entertainment districts. Desperate to preserve her livelihood and the artistic legacy she had spent years perfecting, she sought out practitioners of esoteric magic who promised eternal youth through rituals that borrowed power from realms where time moves differently than in the mortal world. The immortality ceremony required specific astronomical conditions and materials that took months to gather. Bone fragments from saints, water blessed during solar eclipses, and most crucially, the willing sacrifice of her human limitations in exchange for transcendence beyond mortal constraints. But when the ritual reached its climax, an earthquake disrupted the carefully arranged ceremonial elements, causing the transformative energies to fragment and merge chaotically rather than achieving the controlled metamorphosis that would have granted true immortality. You enter the temple through doors that hang askew on broken hinges, finding an interior where shadows gather in patterns that defy the light, filtering through holes in the roof. The main hall still contains remnants of Rangiku's failed ritual, a circle of stones blackened by supernatural fire, metal implements twisted into shapes that hurt to observe directly, and mirrors cracked in patterns that suggest they reflected images too terrible for ordinary glass to contain without shattering. The dual nature of Rangiku's transformation manifests in her physical appearance, which shifts between human and demonic characteristics according to emotional states and lunar cycles. During moments of hope or artistic inspiration, she appears as a luminous geisha whose beauty transcends mortal standards, her kimono woven from moonlight and her movements displaying grace that seems to bend reality around her gestures. But when despair overwhelms her consciousness, her form warps into something with horns that spiral from her skull, claws that extend from delicate fingers, and eyes that burn with the frustrated rage of 15 years spent trapped between worlds. Her attempts to communicate with temple visitors reveal the sophisticated intelligence that survives within her transformed consciousness, as she speaks in the cultured dialect that marked her as an educated entertainer while describing experiences that belong to realms beyond human comprehension. She recounts memories of performing for audiences of shadows, dancing to music played by instruments carved from crystallized time, and experiencing emotions so intense they would destroy ordinary human consciousness if felt at full strength. The abandoned ritual that created Rangiku's condition left specific requirements for its completion, involving components that must be gathered during precise celestial alignments while maintaining spiritual purity that few mortals can achieve. She has spent years seeking individuals with sufficient knowledge and courage to attempt finishing what was started decades ago, but most flee in terror when they encounter her dual nature, while others lack the esoteric understanding necessary to manipulate forces that exist beyond conventional, religious, or magical traditions. You witness one of Rangiku's manifestations during twilight, when the boundary between day and night creates optimal conditions for her consciousness to achieve temporary stability. She appears initially as a beautiful woman in elaborate dress, her painted face showing the perfect composure expected of her profession. But as shadows deepen around the temple, her features begin shifting between human and demonic characteristics, with changes that occur too rapidly for eyes to follow clearly. Her tears, when they fall, burn like molten metal against the temple's wooden floors, creating patterns that resemble the ritual circles used in summoning ceremonies. These fiery droplets retain supernatural properties long after they cool, glowing faintly in darkness while emitting heat that can be felt from several feet away. Local legend claims that touching one of Rangiku's crystallized tears can grant visions of the spirit realm, but also warns that such contact often drives mortals mad, with exposure to realities their minds cannot safely process. The failed immortality ritual continues to affect the temple's spiritual environment in ways that extend beyond Rangiku's personal transformation, creating dimensional instabilities that allow glimpses into parallel realities where different versions of the ceremony reached completion. Visitors report seeing ghostly images of successful transformations, alternate Rangikus who achieved true immortality or perfect destruction, their phantom forms serving as reminders of paths not taken and possibilities forever lost. Buddhist monk Kenshin arrives at the temple summoned by reports of supernatural disturbances that threaten to spread beyond the mountain region if left unresolved. His examination of the ritual site reveals the complex magical mechanics that created Rangiku's condition, involving energies that operate according to principles that predate organized religious traditions. The monk realizes that conventional exorcism techniques will prove inadequate against a being whose existence spans multiple dimensional planes simultaneously. The confrontation between monk and spirit unfolds not as battle but as negotiation, with Kenshin recognizing that Rangiku's consciousness retains enough humanity to respond to compassionate treatment despite her demonic aspects. Her desperate pleas for completion of the immortality ritual gradually give way to deeper conversations about the nature of existence, the meaning of beauty, and the possibility of finding peace within circumstances that cannot be changed through external intervention. Through patient dialogue, Monk Kenshin helps Rangiku understand that her obsession with completing the failed ritual stems from inability to accept the fundamental change in her nature rather than genuine hope for restoration. Her dual form represents not curse but evolution, a new kind of existence that transcends conventional categories of human and demon, while retaining aspects of both identities. The horror lies not in what she has become, but in her refusal to embrace the possibilities that her transformation has created. The therapeutic breakthrough comes when Rangiku stops fighting against her demonic aspects and begins exploring how her enhanced capabilities might serve purposes beyond personal restoration. Her immortal consciousness could preserve artistic traditions that would otherwise be lost to time, while her supernatural abilities allow her to protect the temple from desecration by those who would exploit its accumulated spiritual power for selfish purposes. The ritual of acceptance that Monk Kenshin facilitates involves not external ceremony, but internal acknowledgement of her transformed nature as valid rather than corrupted. As Rangiku embraces both her human memories and demonic capabilities, her appearance stabilizes into a form that blends beautiful and terrible elements without the constant shifting that once marked her psychological instability. Her tears of fire become tears of light, still supernatural but no longer burning with the pain of rejected transformation. The final moments of her earthly existence occur during sunset, when the transition from day to night mirrors her own acceptance of dual nature. Her form becomes increasingly translucent as her consciousness prepares to move beyond physical manifestation, but instead of disappearing entirely, she achieves a state of spiritual equilibrium that allows her to remain connected to the temple while no longer being trapped within it. Her liberation takes an unexpected form, as she becomes a guardian spirit who protects the temple from those who would misuse its accumulated spiritual power, while serving as a guide for future seekers who approach the site with genuine spiritual intentions. Her dual nature allows her to appear as beautiful geisha to those with pure hearts while manifesting demonic aspects to drive away individuals whose motivations involve exploitation or desecration of sacred spaces. The temple transforms from a place of abandonment into a pilgrimage destination where individuals struggling with their own identity conflicts can seek guidance from a spirit who understands the challenge of integrating opposing aspects. Self. Ranjiku's story becomes a teaching tool about the importance of accepting transformation rather than fighting against changes that cannot be reversed through force of will alone. Your departure from the temple carries with it the understanding that some forms of spiritual evolution require abandoning conventional definitions of success and failure. Rangiku's transformation from failed immortality seeker to guardian spirit demonstrates that apparent disasters can become opportunities for growth if approached with sufficient courage and wisdom. Her continued existence serves as proof that identity can encompass contradictory elements without losing coherence or purpose. The seasonal cycles bring changes to Rangiku's manifestations, with spring encouraging her more human aspects, while autumn emphasizes her demonic characteristics, suggesting that her dual nature reflects natural processes of growth and decay that govern all existence. Visitors learn to approach the temple during times when her manifestations align with their own spiritual needs, seeking guidance from either her geisha wisdom or her demonic insights depending on the challenges they face. The abandoned ritual site develops its own reputation as a place where incomplete transformations can find resolution through acceptance rather than completion. Other spirits with similar conflicts begin appearing at the temple, drawn by Rangiku's example of successful integration between opposing aspects of supernatural identity. The location becomes a sanctuary for beings who exist between conventional categories. offering community for those who no longer fit standard definitions of human or inhuman. Local authorities established the temple as a protected site where spiritual phenomena are acknowledged and respected, rather than suppressed or exploited. Rangiku's presence provides natural protection against casual vandalism, while her guidance helps serious pilgrims navigate the complex spiritual challenges associated with personal transformation. The arrangement benefits both the spirit, who finds purpose in service, and the community, which gains a supernatural guardian for an important historical site. Your final observation reveals that Rangiku's eyes, while no longer burning with the pain of rejected transformation, retain a quality of eternal longing that speaks to desires that transcend both human and demonic nature. Her acceptance of her dual condition has brought peace, but not complete satisfaction, suggesting that some aspects of spiritual yearning persist, regardless of the resolution achieved for immediate conflicts. The story of the abandoned ritual serves as a reminder that spiritual experiments carry risks that extend beyond personal failure to affect entire communities and future generations. Rangiku's transformation demonstrates both the dangers of seeking shortcuts to transcendence and the possibilities for finding meaning within circumstances that initially appear to represent nothing but loss and horror. In the end, the temple stands as a monument to the complexity of spiritual evolution, where failure and success intertwine in ways that challenge simple moral categories. Rangiku's presence reminds visitors that some forms of redemption require abandoning the goals that originally motivated spiritual seeking, finding new purposes that emerge from accepting rather than fighting against the changes that life imposes on consciousness seeking growth beyond conventional limitations. In the coastal village of Shiranami in 1854, the death of Geisha Michiko through her lover's cruel betrayal created a vengeful shadow that fed on the terror of those who once cherished her beauty, her ghostly form wandering the narrow streets each night dressed in the same midnight kimono she wore when poison claimed her life, her quiet sobs echoing from doorways as she searched for victims to share the anguish that consumed her spirit. The villagers barricaded themselves indoors after sunset, knowing that her touch could drain the warmth from living hearts and leave behind only the cold emptiness that defined her spectral existence. You arrive in Shiranami as winter storms batter the fishing village, drawn by reports of supernatural harassment that has paralyzed the community for 3 months since Michiko's death. The once prosperous settlement now resembles a ghost town after dark, with shuttered windows and empty streets that echo only with the sound of her ethereal weeping. Fishermen refuse to venture out for night catches, while merchants have abandoned the evening markets that once brought prosperity to this remote coastal community. Michiko's tragedy began with her love for Kenjiro, a wealthy merchant who visited Shiranami regularly during his trading journeys along the coast. Their romance bloomed over months of clandestine meetings, with promises of marriage that convinced her to abandon her professional obligations and devote herself entirely to their secret relationship. But Kenjiro's declarations of love masked darker intentions. He was already married and sought only temporary entertainment during his business travels. The betrayal reached its devastating climax when Michiko discovered Kenjiro's deception through letters she found in his belongings, revealing not only his existing marriage but also his mockery of her devotion in correspondence with friends who found her naive trust amusing. Confronted with evidence of his lies, Kenjiro chose murder over exposure, poisoning her tea during what she believed would be a romantic evening, but which became her final moments of mortal existence. The transformation from devoted lover to vengeful spirit occurred instantly upon Michiko's death. her profound emotional trauma creating spiritual anchors that bound her consciousness to the physical world with chains forged from betrayal and rage. Her ghost emerged from her corpse as a shadow given form, retaining human shape, but composed of darkness so absolute that looking at her directly caused viewers' eyes to water, as if staring into an abyss that absorbed all light. You witness one of her manifestations during your first night in the village, when her shadowy form glides through the streets with movements that blend the graceful choreography of her former profession with the predatory stalking of a supernatural hunter. Her kimono, while maintaining its elegant silhouette, appears to be woven from crystallized despair, its fabric absorbing moonlight rather than reflecting it, while creating patterns that shift between beautiful designs and images of betrayal and death. The shadow feeds on human fear through direct contact that drains emotional energy from her victims, leaving them hollow and listless for weeks after encounter with her spectral presence. Her touch burns with cold that penetrates beyond physical sensation to freeze the capacity for joy, trust, and love itself. Several villagers have fallen into catatonic states after prolonged exposure to her influence, their minds retreating from reality to escape the overwhelming despair that her presence generates. Her haunting follows patterns that reflect the geography of her betrayal, with the shadow appearing most frequently near locations where she shared moments of happiness with Kenjiro before discovering his deception. The tea house where they first met becomes a focal point for supernatural activity, while the garden where he proposed marriage now withers despite careful tending, its plants dying from exposure to spiritual energies that corrupt rather than nourish growing things. The villagers' attempts to protect themselves through conventional means prove futile against a spirit whose power draws from emotions rather than physical vulnerabilities. Blessed Salt creates only temporary barriers that she can dissolve through concentrated malevolence, while prayers seem to strengthen rather than weaken her influence, as if their desperation provides additional fuel for her supernatural manifestations. Ancient warrior Takeshi arrives in Shiranami, summoned by urgent messages describing supernatural attacks that threaten to depopulate the entire village if left unchecked. His weathered appearance speaks of decades spent confronting threats both human and inhuman, while the enchanted sword he carries pulses with spiritual energy that has been accumulated through countless battles against forces that exist beyond ordinary understanding. The warrior's approach to the supernatural threat differs from conventional exorcism techniques, recognizing that Michiko's shadow represents not simple malevolence but crystallized trauma that requires healing rather than destruction. His enchanted blade, forged from iron, blessed by mountain spirits and tempered in sacred flames, possesses the ability to cut through spiritual bonds without destroying the consciousness they contain, offering the possibility of liberation rather than annihilation. The confrontation between warrior and shadow unfolds in the village's central square at midnight, when the boundary between worlds reaches its thinnest point and supernatural entities can manifest with maximum clarity. Michiko's ghost appears as a writhing mass of darkness that occasionally reveals glimpses of her former beauty, her form shifting between the elegant geisha she once was and the abyss of despair she has become through betrayal and death. The battle proceeds in silence, broken only by the whisper of enchanted steel, cutting through supernatural substance, and the soft sobs that continue to emanate from the shadow's core. Takeshi's blade moves with precision that reflects decades of training in techniques designed specifically for confronting spectral opponents, each strike targeting the spiritual anchors that bind Michiko's consciousness to her vengeful manifestation, rather than attempting to harm her essential self. As the warrior's blade makes contact with the shadow's form, Brilliant light erupts from the points of impact, revealing the sophisticated spiritual mechanics that maintain her ghostly existence. The darkness begins to unravel like fabric being carefully separated into individual threads, each strand representing a different aspect of the trauma that transformed love into hatred and beauty into horror. The climactic moment arrives when Takeshi's final strike severs the central bond that anchors Michiko's consciousness to her vengeful manifestation, causing the shadow to split apart in a burst of illumination that banishes the supernatural mist that has shrouded the village for months. But instead of destruction, the light reveals transformation, the shadow's malevolent darkness reconfiguring itself into a luminous form that retains Michiko's essential identity while transcending the trauma that once defined her existence. The transformed spirit appears as she did in life, but enhanced by ethereal beauty that speaks to wisdom gained through suffering and redemption achieved through understanding. Her kimono now seems woven from moonlight rather than despair, while her movements display the same artistic grace that once made her famous throughout the region. Most significantly, her eyes no longer burn with the rage of betrayal, but glow with the compassionate sadness of someone who has learned to transform pain into protection for others. Michiko's liberation from vengeful manifestation does not result in her departure from the mortal realm, but in her transformation into a guardian spirit whose presence protects rather than threatens the village that witnessed her tragedy. Her supernatural abilities, once focused on spreading despair, now serve to shield Shiranami from other malevolent forces that might threaten its residents. She becomes a sentinel who watches from the shadows, her intimate knowledge of betrayal and trauma, allowing her to identify and neutralize threats before they can harm innocent people. The village gradually recovers from months of supernatural terror as Michiko's transformed presence creates an atmosphere of protection rather than fear. Children who once fled at the sound of her approach now report seeing a beautiful lady in white who guides them safely home when they venture out after dark. Merchants return to evening business knowing that their transactions are overseen by a spirit whose experience with deception makes her an ideal guardian against fraud and betrayal. Takeshi's departure from Shiranami marks the completion of his mission, but his warnings about the temporary nature of spiritual transformations remind the villagers that Michiko's current benevolent state requires ongoing nurturing through community respect and acknowledgement of her sacrifice. The warrior explains that guardian spirits draw strength from the gratitude of those they protect, but can revert to malevolent manifestations if their service goes unrecognized, or their memory becomes corrupted by fear and misunderstanding. The establishment of regular ceremonies honoring Michiko's protection ensures that her transformation remains stable while providing the village with formal structures for expressing gratitude to their supernatural guardian. Monthly festivals celebrate not her tragic death but her redemptive evolution from victim to protector, creating traditions that will preserve her benevolent influence for future generations who inherit the benefits of her watchful presence. Your extended stay in Shiranami reveals the complex dynamics that govern Michiko's guardian role, as her supernatural senses allow her to detect threats that exist beyond normal human perception. She prevents accidents by guiding people away from dangerous areas, warns of approaching storms through subtle environmental signs, and protects travelers from bandits who would exploit the village's remote location for criminal purposes. The economic recovery that follows the resolution of the supernatural crisis demonstrates how spiritual forces can influence material prosperity when properly balanced. Shiranami's reputation as a village protected by a benevolent guardian spirit attracts pilgrims and curiosity seekers. bringing new sources of income, while the security provided by Michiko's presence encourages merchants to establish permanent trading relationships rather than treating the settlement as a mere stopping point. Seasonal changes affect Michiko's manifestations in ways that reflect the natural cycles governing all existence, with her presence becoming more visible during times when the boundary between worlds grows thin. Autumn brings more frequent appearances as she helps prepare the village for winter hardships, while spring sees her guiding the planting of crops with supernatural knowledge of optimal timing and placement. The transformed relationship between the living and the dead that Michiko's presence creates serves as a model for other communities struggling with supernatural disturbances, demonstrating that some ghostly manifestations can be healed rather than banished if approached with sufficient wisdom and compassion. Her story spreads throughout the region, inspiring new approaches to spiritual conflicts that emphasize transformation over destruction. Your final observation reveals that Michiko's eyes, while no longer burning with the rage of betrayal, retain depths that speak to experiences no living person could survive. Her transformation from vengeful shadow to protective guardian represents not the erasure of her suffering, but its alchemical conversion into wisdom that serves others facing similar challenges. Her presence reminds the village that even the most devastating betrayals can become sources of strength when processed through consciousness capable of transcending personal trauma. The Guardian's protection extends beyond physical threats to include emotional and spiritual guidance for villagers facing their own experiences of betrayal and loss. Young women seeking advice about romantic relationships find themselves guided away from deceptive suitors, while merchants receive intuitive warnings about dishonest business partners. Michiko's intimate knowledge of betrayal's mechanisms makes her an invaluable source of protection against the human capacity for cruelty and deception. The legacy of Shiranami's transformation serves as proof that some supernatural manifestations represent not invasions from hostile dimensions, but opportunities for communities to develop new forms of spiritual protection through compassionate response to tragic circumstances. Michiko's evolution from threat to guardian demonstrates that consciousness can transcend even the most traumatic experiences when provided with understanding and support rather than fear and rejection. In the end, the village stands as a testament to the possibility of transforming tragedy into blessing through approaches that recognize the humanity within supernatural manifestations. Michiko's continued presence ensures that betrayal's lessons protect rather than corrupt future generations, while her story inspires hope that even the deepest wounds can become sources of wisdom and strength when approached with sufficient courage and compassion. In the ancient forests of Kumano in 1857, deep within a sacred grove where pilgrims once sought enlightenment, a human skull glowed with unnatural fire every night at the exact hour when Geisha Asuka died 3 centuries earlier, crushed beneath tons of rock when the cave where she sought shelter collapsed during an earthquake, her spirit transforming into a furious Oni whose rage at her stolen future burned so intensely that her bones refused to crumble into dust. The skull's phosphorescent light served as both beacon and warning, drawing curious travelers into the forest depths where Asuka's demonic form waited to share the fury that consumed her undead consciousness. You venture into the Kumano forest, guided by reports from mountain monks who describe supernatural disturbances that have plagued the sacred pathways for generations. The ancient trees form a canopy so dense that daylight barely penetrates to the forest floor, creating an eternal twilight where the boundary between the natural and supernatural worlds grows dangerously thin. Local guides refuse to approach the area after sunset, when Asuka's skull begins its nightly display of otherworldly illumination. The tragedy that created this vengeful spirit occurred in 1557, when young Asuka traveled through these mountains fleeing an arranged marriage that would have ended her dreams of artistic achievement. She possessed extraordinary talent in dance and music, but was born into a family that valued practical concerns over artistic ambition. The cave where she sought temporary shelter seemed like providence, offering protection from both pursuing relatives and the violent storm that raged through the mountain passes. The earthquake struck without warning, bringing down sections of the cave ceiling that trapped Asuka beneath rubble too heavy for her to move. Her death came slowly over several days, during which she experienced not acceptance of her fate, but mounting rage at the cosmic injustice that stole her life before she could achieve the artistic recognition she believed she deserved. This fury became the spiritual anchor that bound her consciousness to the physical realm, transforming her gentle spirit into something monstrous. You discover the skull in a clearing where the collapsed cave once stood, its bleached surface emanating light that pulses with the rhythm of an angry heartbeat. The bone shows no signs of natural decay despite centuries of exposure to weather, while the empty sockets burn with flames that cast no heat but create shadows that move independently of any light source. Around the skull, the ground remains permanently scorched in patterns that suggest the presence of supernatural fire that burns without consuming fuel. The first manifestation of Asuka's Oni form occurs when you approach too close to her remains, triggering a response that begins with temperature fluctuations violent enough to crack tree bark and create ice crystals in summer air. Her spirit materializes gradually, starting as wisps of luminous mist that coalesce into the outline of a woman in elaborate dress. But as her form solidifies, details emerge that reveal the demonic transformation that rage has wrought upon her consciousness. Asuka's Oni appearance blends the refined beauty that defined her mortal existence with supernatural enhancements that speak to centuries of accumulated fury. Her face retains the classical features that would have made her a celebrated geisha, but her eyes burn with flames that shift between colors that exist nowhere in nature. Horns spiral from her skull in patterns that echo the artistic motifs she once incorporated into her dance performances, while her elongated fingers end in claws that could tear through steel as easily as silk. Her supernatural abilities extend far beyond physical transformation, encompassing control over forest elements that she uses to express emotional states, too intense for normal reality to contain. When her rage reaches peak intensity, trees wither and die within seconds while animals flee in terror from emanations that threaten to drive even wild creatures mad with fear. During moments of grief for her lost opportunities, her weeping creates acidic rain that dissolves everything it touches except the bones that anchor her consciousness to the earthly realm. The Oni's attempts at communication reveal the sophisticated intelligence that survives within her transformed consciousness, as she speaks in classical Japanese that preserves the educated dialect she mastered during her brief mortal life. But her words carry undertones of inhuman fury that make conversation difficult, as every sentence builds toward explosive expressions of rage at the fate that denied her the artistic achievements she considered her birthright. Your encounters with Asuka reveal the complex psychology that drives her supernatural manifestations, as she alternates between desperate pleas for understanding and violent demonstrations of the power that centuries of anger have accumulated within her spectral form. She describes visions of the performances she never gave, the audiences she never moved to tears, and the artistic legacy that died with her in the collapsed cave. each lost opportunity adding fuel to the fires that burn within her transformed consciousness. Buddhist monk Ryogen arrives in the forest summoned by reports of supernatural disturbances that threaten to spread beyond the immediate area if left unchecked. His weathered face shows the strain of decades spent confronting forces that exist beyond normal religious understanding, while his collection of forbidden texts reveals knowledge of exorcism techniques that Orthodox Buddhism officially discourages due to their dangerous nature. The monk's examination of Asuka's skull and the surrounding supernatural phenomena reveals the unusual spiritual mechanics that maintain her Oni manifestation. Unlike typical ghostly hauntings that draw power from external sources, her transformation feeds on its own rage, in self-perpetuating cycles that grow stronger with time, rather than fading as most supernatural manifestations do. Breaking such cycles requires techniques that address the emotional rather than spiritual roots of her earthbound existence. The exorcism ritual begins at sunset, when the skull's nightly illumination creates optimal conditions for supernatural communication. Monk Ryogen arranges offerings around Asuka's remains, elaborate flower arrangements that honor her artistic sensibilities, foods that represent the life experiences she never enjoyed, and incense that creates smoke patterns designed to soothe rather than banish spiritual consciousness. His approach recognizes that her Oni transformation stems from unfulfilled dreams rather than simple malevolence. As the ceremony progresses, Asuka's manifestations intensify in response to the monk's compassionate approach, her Oni form appearing with unprecedented clarity as she struggles between the rage that defines her existence and the human emotions that the ritual's offerings awaken within her transformed consciousness. The flowers remind her of beauty she once hoped to create, while the food speaks to sensual experiences that death stole from her before they could be fully explored. The climactic confrontation occurs when Monk Ryogen's chanted prayers reach frequencies that resonate with the deepest levels of Asuka's psychological trauma, forcing her to confront the fundamental question of whether her artistic ambitions justified the centuries of fury that have defined her supernatural existence. Her Oni form writhes in apparent agony as she experiences the collision between her idealized dreams and the reality of what those dreams have cost her consciousness. The breakthrough comes when Asuka finally acknowledges that her rage has transformed her into something far more monstrous than the life she rejected through her refusal to accept an arranged marriage. Her pursuit of artistic perfection, corrupted by centuries of supernatural anger, has become a form of spiritual prison more restrictive than any earthly constraints she once faced. This recognition creates the first crack in the psychological armor that has protected her ego from accepting responsibility for her condition. But the exorcism reveals that Asuka's transformation runs too deep for simple resolution. Through acknowledgement of her psychological errors, her consciousness has become so thoroughly integrated with Oni nature that separation would destroy rather than liberate her essential self. The monk realizes that her case requires acceptance of damnation rather than hope for redemption, as some spiritual wounds prove too severe for healing through conventional therapeutic approaches. The ritual's conclusion brings not liberation but clarification, as Asuka finally understands that her refusal to accept mortal limitations has trapped her in an existence that denies both human satisfaction and supernatural transcendence. Her skull continues its nightly illumination, but the quality of light changes from angry fire to melancholy phosphorescence that speaks to acceptance of eternal punishment rather than ongoing rebellion against cosmic injustice. The forest begins to heal from centuries of supernatural contamination as Asuka's rage transforms into resignation. allowing natural processes to resume in areas that were previously corrupted by her otherworldly fury. Trees that had withered in her presence begin showing signs of recovery, while animals gradually return to territories they had abandoned due to supernatural fear. But the healing remains incomplete, as her continued presence ensures that the area will never entirely return to normal conditions. Monk Ryogan's departure leaves behind not resolution but stalemate, as Asuka's consciousness achieves stability through acceptance of her transformed state rather than hope for return to human existence. His warnings about the permanent nature of certain spiritual transformations serve as reminders that some choices create consequences that persist beyond individual lifespans, affecting entire regions for generations. Your final observations reveal that Asuka has evolved into something approaching a territorial guardian, her Oni nature now serving to protect the forest from intrusion by those whose motivations involve exploitation rather than spiritual seeking. Her intimate knowledge of artistic ambition allows her to identify and discourage visitors whose dreams carry the same seeds of destructive obsession that created her own transformation, while her supernatural abilities provide effective deterrence against casual desecration of sacred spaces. The skull's nightly illumination becomes a landmark for serious pilgrims seeking guidance about the dangers of spiritual pride and artistic ambition unchecked by wisdom or compassion. Asuka's story spreads throughout the region as a cautionary tale about the importance of accepting human limitations rather than pursuing transcendence through paths that reject fundamental aspects of mortal existence. Seasonal changes bring fluctuations in Asuka's manifestations, with autumn intensifying her melancholy as the dying year reminds her of opportunities that will never return, while spring's renewal creates episodes of renewed fury as natural rebirth contrasts sharply with her eternal spiritual stagnation. These cycles create predictable patterns that allow careful observers to approach during her quieter periods, while avoiding times when her Oni nature becomes most active. The establishment of informal pilgrimage routes that include Asuka's forest creates economic benefits for nearby communities, while ensuring that her story continues to serve educational purposes for future generations. Local guides develop expertise in supernatural tourism that respects both the danger and the wisdom that her presence represents, creating sustainable relationships between human curiosity and supernatural phenomena. Your departure from the forest carries with it the understanding that some forms of spiritual evolution require accepting eternal punishment as the price for choices that prioritize personal desire over cosmic harmony. Asuka's transformation from ambitious young woman to resigned Oni demonstrates that consciousness can survive the most radical changes while losing everything that originally made existence meaningful. The glowing skull serves as both monument and warning, its nightly illumination reminding all who see it that artistic ambition unchecked by wisdom can become a form of spiritual poison that destroys everything it touches. Asuka's continued existence proves that some dreams exact prices too high for mortal consciousness to pay, while maintaining connection to sources of meaning that make existence worthwhile. In the end, the forest stands as a testament to the complex relationship between human ambition and spiritual reality, where the pursuit of transcendence can become its own form of damnation when divorced from acceptance of mortal limitations. Asuka's story continues to unfold each night, when her skull begins its eerie glow, reminding visitors that consciousness can persist long after everything that makes existence worth living has been consumed by obsessions that promise fulfillment but deliver only eternal regret.